Financial crisis we are now in that has occurred in part because of greed and avarice and incompetence and perhaps fraud, but has also arisen because of the lack of an honest, tough regulatory system to rein in those abuses that has been most unfortunate during the last several years. It's happened sort of in the dead of the night, and it points out the need for Uncle Sam to provide a regulatory system that really stands up for hardworking Americans. And I come to talk about one of those things that we need, which is a regulatory system to make sure that Americans have access to multiple sources of information so that we can make studied, reasoned decisions about public policy. And unfortunately, under the Bush administration, which I must say has not done a heck of a job in regulating the financial services industry the last few years, has also not done a heck of a job recently in providing a regulatory structure that would give Americans access to multiple sources of information in our news outlets. Specifically, what I'm concerned about, I'd like to talk about tonight, is the Federal Communications Commission under this administration has attempted to allow greater consolidation in our media outlets, which basically reduces the sources of multiple diverse sources of information that Americans receive. And this has happened in the dark of the night, and I'd like to address this problem tonight. Many of my colleagues have advocated against the consolidation of our news outlets because we know having multiple sources of information is healthy for public debate. It's absolutely intrinsic to a functioning democracy. And that's why we were outraged when the FCC voted last December to lift a ban on one company owning a daily newspaper and a broadcast station in the same market. Too much consolidation. FCC Chairman Kevin Martman claimed that the new rules applied only in our nation's biggest markets. Unfortunately, we found out that that was simply not the case. The new rules contained enormous loopholes that would allow companies to easily obtain permanent waivers that would allow this illicit and unnecessary consolidation in our media markets. Now, this process has also lacked transparency. Americans have not had a fair shake to weigh in on this decision. Prior to the vote, the FCC held 6 town hall meetings during the course of the year. And even though the FCC gave little notice, thousands of people showed up to express concerns about what the Bush administration was doing here. The last public hearing the FCC held was in my hometown of Seattle this last November. Along with Senator Maria Cantwell, I called on Chairman Martin to give the public at least 4-week notice to prepare for this meeting. Well, clearly in an effort to reduce public response, they gave us about 4 days' notice. Nonetheless, 1,000 citizens showed up to express a relatively unanimous opinion against any more media consolidation, against the position the FCC was advocating. However, the FCC chair did not listen to those people, and I know this because it turns out, and I thought this was a little embarrassing for the FCC chairman, turned out he had written an op-ed piece for the New York Times in favor of further possible consolidation, submitted it to the paper even before he got done with the hearings. And then he came out to Seattle and purported to be listening to the Americans. He'd already formed his opinion, written an op-ed, what he was going to do. Wasn't a very fair process. This is in part why I've introduced bipartisan legislation prior to the vote, calling on the Commission to conduct its ownership proceedings with greater transparency and deal with the crisis in minority and female ownership in broadcast stations. You know, it's shameful that people of color own just 3% and women 5% of our nation's TV stations. Well, following the December vote, the Senate introduced and passed a resolution of disapproval in May by a nearly unanimous voice vote. This enjoyed broad bipartisan support. We know where Americans stand on this issue. They do not want to continue the increasing consolidation in the immediate market. I've introduced a resolution of disapproval. We have over 50 co-sponsors. We're going to run out of time to get this bill passed this year, but I want to congratulate the public whose vigorous opposition to this consolidation has allowed our voices to be heard. There have been no new major media mergers have taken place in the broadcast industry, why we have been fighting this battle. So I want to congratulate people for fighting this effort, and we will continue our efforts into the next Congress. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.